Even the most powerful protectors can fail when it matters most. This is the story of the guardians that failed. 20 mythic protectors from across the globe who were sworn to defend civilizations but could not stop the fall. You will learn the hidden reasons why these gods, beasts, and heroes faltered, revealing timeless lessons about power and fallibility. How could a watchman with 100 eyes be blinded to the truth? What cosmic loophole allowed a single, overlooked plant to doom an entire pantheon? By the end, you will see the surprising vulnerabilities behind legendary strength and what these ancient collapses teach us about our own world. What do you think is the greatest weakness of any guardian? That archetype of the guardian is a thread woven through the dreams of every civilization. It represents our deepest longing for a force that stands between our fragile order and the looming chaos of the unknown. We see this figure in the stoic, unblinking sentinels of Norse myth, guarding the bridges to the divine realms. We hear their echo in the celestial watchers of Mesopotamia, beings who held the very stars in their places. These were not just monsters or gods of war. They were living symbols of hope and justice, the embodiment of a promise that someone or something was always on watch. Their power was bound by sacred oaths and cosmic duties, making their role absolutely fundamental to the world's balance. This is precisely why their failure was so catastrophic. It was never just a lost battle. It was a spiritual collapse, a tear in the fabric of reality itself for the people who trusted them. The fall of a guardian meant the rules of the universe had broken. To truly grasp the weight of these failures, we must first understand the immense hope that was placed in them. This foundational idea brings us to our first guardian, a figure from Greek mythology whose very design was meant to make failure impossible. He was a being with 100 eyes, and his name was Argus Panoptes. The sheer scale of their power was almost beyond comprehension. Briareos, Cottus, and Gyges, the Hecatoncheires, were primordial giants born with 100 arms and 50 heads each. When Zeus waged his great war against the Titans, he freed these colossal beings from the abyss, and their entrance into the conflict was nothing short of apocalyptic. Imagine 300 boulders flying through the air at once, a relentless barrage that crushed the Titan armies and secured victory for the Olympian gods. In that moment, their strength seemed like the ultimate insurance policy, a force so overwhelming that no future threat could possibly arise. Yet this is where their story takes a profound and tragic turn. Their failure was not one of immediate strength, but of lasting purpose. After the war, the Hecatoncheires were given a new duty: to become the eternal jailers of the defeated Titans, standing guard over the dark prison of Tartarus. And here they stood, successful in their task for ages, ensuring the Titans never broke free. So how can this be considered a failure? The Guardians did their specific job perfectly. The failure lay in a deeper, more insidious problem. While the Hecatoncheires contained the old enemy, they did nothing to address the rot growing within Olympus itself. The very nature of power, the ambition and moral decay that had fueled the Titanomachy, began to fester among the new gods. Their overwhelming force was a temporary fix, a cage for a symptom, while the disease of conflict and tyranny simply found a new host. The Hecatoncheires represent a timeless lesson that raw power alone cannot create lasting peace if the root causes of chaos are left to simmer. This theme of a single, overlooked weakness leading to catastrophe finds a perfect and far more intimate example in the next Guardian, a figure whose vigilance was considered unbreakable until one simple melody put it to sleep. Argus Panoptes was the perfect watchman, a being whose very form was a masterpiece of surveillance. With 100 eyes distributed across his head, he could maintain a continuous, unblinking watch. No more than a few eyes would ever close at a time, making his gaze an impenetrable shield. The goddess Hera, in her jealous rage, had assigned him a very specific task: to guard the beautiful nymph Io, whom a guilty Zeus had transformed into a white heifer. Argus became the living fence, the unbreachable prison for this innocent prisoner of divine politics. His assignment was simple, and his design made failure seem impossible. Yet his downfall did not come from a lack of vigilance, but from a weapon he could not defend against: the art of deception. The god Hermes, acting on Zeus's orders, did not confront the Watchman with force. Instead, he approached with enchanting stories and the soothing melody of his reed pipes. He sat with Argus, weaving tales until, one by one, the 100 eyes grew heavy. Hermes told stories so compelling, his music so hypnotic, that he achieved the impossible. He lulled every single eye of Argus Panoptes into a simultaneous, deep slumber. In that single moment of unified sleep, the perfect guardian was defeated, and his charge, Io, was set free. This was not a failure of sight, but a failure of strategy. Argus was designed to see every physical threat, but he had no defense for a clever mind that exploited his nature. Hera, upon discovering her fallen watcher, took his 100 eyes and placed them upon the tail of the peacock, a beautiful and permanent memorial to a guardian who saw everything, yet could not prevent the one escape that mattered. His story is a haunting lesson that constant vigilance can be rendered useless by a single, well-told story or a clever enough trick. This theme of a fatal compromise leads us to another guardian, one whose failure was not due to an outside trick, but to a deeply personal and internal conflict. Its golden hide was a fortress, a natural armor that turned away every spear and sword. The Nemean Lion was not merely a monster, it was the uncontested master of its domain, a living, breathing embodiment of invincibility that stalked the valley it was meant to govern. In a twisted sense, its presence did create a form of order, the order of absolute fear. No foreign army would dare enter its territory, no rival beast would challenge its rule. But this is where the Guardian's purpose was completely inverted. The lion failed not because it was defeated, but because it forgot who it was supposed to protect. Its power, once a potential shield for the land, became a weapon turned against the very people and creatures it should have safeguarded. The Guardian became the plague, the defender transformed into the primary threat. Its existence was no longer about maintaining balance, but about feeding its own ferocity. The Valley of Nemea did not need protection from outside dangers, it needed rescue from its own warden. This corruption of purpose created a profound vulnerability, one that a hero like Heracles was uniquely equipped to exploit. He understood that you cannot defeat an impenetrable defense with a direct assault. Instead of trying to pierce the hide, he used the lion's own overwhelming nature against it, clubbing the beast into confusion before ultimately finding the one way past its armor. The failure of the Nemean Lion is a brutal lesson in the corruption of power. A guardian who terrorizes their own charges has already failed, long before a hero arrives to end their reign. This tragic transformation from protector to oppressor finds a powerful echo in the frozen halls of Norse mythology, where a god's broken oath would lead to a failure that doomed the entire world. Heimdallr's horn was meant to be the ultimate alarm, a sound that would rally the gods to the final battle. Perched at the edge of Asgard, his senses were so supernaturally sharp that he could perceive the wool growing on a sheep's back and see the distant movements of armies gathering in the misty realms of the giants. His entire existence was a promise of preparedness, and when Ragnarok finally dawned, he did exactly as he was sworn to do. He put the Gjala horn to his lips and blew with all his might, its mournful cry echoing across the 9 worlds to signal the beginning of the end. So in what way did this perfect watchman fail? His failure was not one of action but of outcome. Heimdallr was the embodiment of a perfect early warning system in a cosmos that had already chosen its destructive path. The prophecies of Ragnarok were not just predictions, they were a checklist of inevitabilities set in motion by the gods' own earlier choices. It was Odin who broke a sacred oath to the builder of Asgard's walls, introducing a strand of dishonor into the foundation of their society. It was the gods themselves who, through fear and short-sightedness, allowed the monstrous children of Loki, Fenrir the wolf, Jormungandr the serpent, and Hel to grow into the very instruments of their destruction. Heimdallr could sound the alarm, but he could not roll back time to undo the fatal decisions that made that alarm necessary. He was a flawless guardian in a system that was already broken, his impeccable vigilance rendered tragic by a destiny his masters had written for themselves. This is the lesson of fatalistic duty, that the most perfect watchman in the world cannot prevent a collapse when the seeds of that collapse were sown long ago from within. This profound theme of an internal flaw leading to an unstoppable doom finds a startling parallel in the mythology of ancient Egypt, where a divine protector's own emotional nature became the very key to her failure. The Sphinx did not guard a gate or a treasure, but the very sanity of a city. Perched on her rock outside Thebes, she presented a paradox, a creature of divine punishment that also served as a brutal, terrifying protector. Her method was a riddle, and failure meant a grisly death. This system of fear effectively isolated Thebes, cutting it off from the outside world and creating a desperate, inward-looking community. In a monstrous way, it worked. The city was safe from the comings and goings that might have brought other dangers, but this was a protection built on a foundation of intellectual tyranny. The Sphinx was not fostering resilience or wisdom in the people she terrorized. She was simply cowing them into submission. Her entire purpose was to be an unsolvable obstacle. So when a stranger named Oedipus approached and correctly answered her famous question, the entire framework of her guardianship shattered in an instant. Her power was contingent on being the smartest being present, and the moment she was outwitted, that power evaporated. In her despair, she threw herself from the rock and perished. Thebes celebrated, believing itself freed, but the Sphinx's failure was now complete. She had not been protecting the city from its true festering curse. She had merely been containing the symptoms. With the obstacle of fear removed, the path was clear for Oedipus to enter Thebes, solve the deeper mystery of the previous king's murder, and in doing so, unwittingly fulfill the very prophecy that would plunge the city into plague and unspeakable turmoil. The Sphinx failed because her guardianship was an illusion of control. She blocked the road, but she did nothing to heal the sickness at the heart of Thebes. A guardian who relies on intimidation does not create security. They only delay a more complex and devastating collapse. This catastrophic breakdown from a single point of intellectual failure finds a stark contrast in our next guardian, whose downfall came not from a challenge to his mind, but from a fatal vulnerability in his heart. Its coils were a living wall of impenetrable scales, wrapped around the sacred oak that held the golden fleece. The Dragon of Colchis was the definition of an unwavering protector, a creature that never slept, never blinked, and never wavered in its focus. For generations, it ensured that the symbol of Colchian kingship and divine right remained untouched, its presence a guarantee of stability. This guardian was so perfect in its physical execution that no hero, no matter how strong, could hope to defeat it through force of arms. Its failure, therefore, came from a direction it had no capacity to perceive. The sorceress Medea did not confront the beast with a sword or spear. She approached with a different kind of weapon entirely, one woven from whispered words and enchanted herbs. Using potions and incantations passed down from the goddess Hecate, she cast a profound, supernatural sleep upon the creature. In that single, magically induced moment of slumber, the dragon's perfect vigilance was broken and Jason seized the fleece. The dragon did not fail in its duty. It was simply outmatched by a form of power it could not comprehend or resist. Its physical invincibility was rendered meaningless against a clever application of arcane knowledge. The consequences of this single failure rippled far beyond the sacred grove. The theft of the fleece was a spiritual and political catastrophe for Colchis, stripping away its divine legitimacy and setting in motion a chain of betrayal, murder, and exile that would haunt Jason and Medea for the rest of their tragic lives. The dragon's story teaches us that a guardian designed only to counter physical threats is already obsolete in a world where the most dangerous attacks are often invisible. This idea of a failure written into the very rules of existence finds a profound echo in our next guardian, whose downfall was not a breach of duty, but a perfect and tragic fulfillment of it. The boundary between the living and the dead was supposed to be the most absolute border in all of existence, and its gatekeeper was a creature designed to be the final word on the matter. Cerberus, the three-headed hound of the Greek underworld, was not just a monster, he was a principle given form. His duty was a perfect two-part lock, to prevent the living from descending out of curiosity or desperation, and to ensure the dead never ascended to disrupt the natural order. With serpents for a mane and a venomous tail, his presence at the gates of Hades was the ultimate deterrent, and for the most part he succeeded. The vast, silent majority of the dead remained where they were, and the living knew better than to test him. But his legend is defined not by his daily successes, but by his spectacular, albeit temporary, failures. These breaches reveal a chilling truth about even the most formidable guardians. The first came from a place of overwhelming force. Heracles, in his final labor, did not attempt to sneak past the hound or reason with him. He confronted Cerberus directly, grappling with the beast in a raw contest of strength, and through sheer heroic might, physically overpowered him, dragging him chains and all back to the world of the living. The second breach came from the opposite direction, not from force but from supreme artistry. The musician Orpheus, heartbroken over the death of his wife Eurydice, did not fight Cerberus. He played his lyre with such profound, heartbreaking beauty that he charmed the savage beast into a docile trance, gently walking past its pacified form. In both cases, the cosmic rule was broken. The living entered, and in Heracles' case, a denizen of the dead was temporarily taken out. Cerberus did not fail in his nature. He was simply outmatched by forces that existed outside the parameters of his design. His lesson is one of limits. No barrier, no matter how terrifying or absolute it seems, is entirely impervious. A guardian who represents a single solution, whether it is fear or brute strength, will always be vulnerable to a problem they never anticipated. From the sealed gates of the underworld, we now turn to a guardian who watched over a far more luminous domain, the sun itself, in the vast traditions of Hindu mythology. Even the king of the heavens is not above a moment of careless pride. In the grand cosmic drama of the Samudra Manthan, the churning of the ocean of milk, the god Indra stood as the ultimate guardian of divine order, a sovereign whose power maintained the balance between the Devas and the Asuras. His authority was absolute, his strength the bedrock of celestial security. Yet his downfall began with something as simple as a flower. The sage Durvasa, a being of immense spiritual power, once offered Indra a divine garland as a gift and a blessing. But Indra, swollen with the arrogance of his position, treated the sacred offering with disrespect, carelessly placing it on the trunk of his celestial elephant. The elephant, irritated by the fragrance, threw the garland to the ground and trampled it. This single act of negligence was a profound insult. The sage's wrath was immediate and absolute. He cursed Indra and through him all the Devas, declaring that their strength, their fortune, and their very sovereignty would wither and fade. In that moment, the entire celestial defense system collapsed not from an external assault, but from an internal moral failure. The Guardian King, through his own lack of humility and respect, had disarmed his entire realm. The Devas grew weak and vulnerable, easily overthrown by the Asurans who seized control of the universe. This catastrophic loss of power is what forced the desperate, epic endeavor of churning the cosmic ocean, a monumental effort to retrieve the Amrita, the nectar of immortality, just to restore the balance that Indra's pride had shattered. His story is a powerful lesson in conditional strength. A guardian's power is not a permanent possession. It is a grant contingent on their adherence to Dharma, to righteous conduct and humility. When the guardian forsakes these principles, their power becomes a fleeting illusion, leaving everything they were meant to protect exposed to the storm. This theme of a leader's personal failing triggering cosmic consequences resonates deeply in another mythology, far across the world in the ancient traditions of the Americas. The city of Tolan was meant to be a paradise on earth, a golden metropolis built under the guidance of a god who was both its king and its guardian. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was not a distant deity. He was a hands-on protector who taught his people the secrets of agriculture, the art of the calendar, and the sacred rituals that maintained the cosmos. His reign was an era of perfect corn and gleaming jade, a time when the divine and mortal worlds walked hand in hand. Yet this idyllic existence contained a fatal seed, the god's own rigid adherence to purity and his deep personal sense of honor. His rival, the cunning Tezcatlipoca, saw this not as a strength but as the ultimate weakness to be exploited. He did not attack Tolan with an army. Instead, he arrived with a mirror showing Quetzalcoatl his own mortal, aging reflection, and later, with a potent fermented drink presented as a divine elixir. Disoriented and shamed by his own intoxication, Quetzalcoatl believed he had broken his sacred vows. His profound sense of failure was so absolute that he chose self-imposed exile, abandoning his city and sailing away on a raft of serpents, promising one day to return. The Guardian did not fall in battle. He was psychologically dismantled and then voluntarily left his post. The consequence was catastrophic. Without his guiding wisdom and divine presence, Tolan fell into decay and corruption, its golden age collapsing into a memory. Centuries later, the Aztecs, who saw Quetzalcoatl as a central cultural hero, held tightly to the prophecy of his return. When Spanish ships arrived on their shores, some initially wondered if this was the feathered serpent coming back. This tragic misunderstanding, born from the original failure and absence of their guardian, created a moment of catastrophic hesitation that helped enable a conquest. Quetzalcoatl's story is a heartbreaking lesson in how a protector's greatest virtue, their unwavering integrity, can become the very lever an enemy uses to break them, leaving a void that doom rushes to fill. This theme of a promise broken from within finds a brutal counterpart in the frozen north, where a different kind of oath would lead to a betrayal that shattered the walls of the gods themselves. Even the choosers of the slain were not immune to a broken heart. The Valkyries, Odin's own shield maidens, served as the ultimate guardians of heroic legacy, soaring over battlefields to decide which fallen warriors were worthy of a place in Valhalla. This was not just a matter of honor, it was a critical military function for the coming of Ragnarok. Every Einherjar, every resurrected warrior feasting in the Great Hall, was another soldier for the final battle. Their system of selection was meant to be impersonal, a perfect divine mechanism for building the army of the apocalypse. And then there was Brynhild. Her story reveals a fatal flaw in this celestial machinery. When she directly disobeyed Odin's command in a dispute between two kings, her motive was not malice or ambition. It was a deeply human sense of what was right, a personal conviction about honor and love that overrode her sacred duty. For this act of defiance, she was stripped of her Valkyrie nature, cast into a mortal form, and condemned to an enchanted sleep within a ring of fire. Her personal failure created a crack in the divine defense plan. A single, crucial cog in the machine of cosmic preparation had been compromised not by weakness, but by a strength of feeling it was never designed to handle. The consequences spiraled far beyond her punishment, intertwining with the tragic saga of Sigurd and the cursed ring Anvaranot, weaving a new strand of fate that would only add to the chaos of Ragnarok. Brynhild's tale teaches us that a guardian bound by an unbreakable oath is only as strong as their own heart. When duty and personal conviction wage war within a single soul, the entire system they uphold can fracture. This deep, internal conflict between a guardian's role and their desires finds a powerful echo in the mists of Celtic mythology, where another protector faced an impossible choice. A guardian can see the future clearly yet remain powerless to change its course. The Morrigan, the Celtic Phantom Queen, was a triad of sisters representing war, fate, and sovereignty. She was less a shield for individual heroes and more a guardian of the land's deep, cyclical nature, where kings rose and fell according to an unchangeable pattern. Her methods were not always gentle. She would appear on battlefields as a crow foretelling doom, or test a hero's worth through direct confrontation. Her most famous failure revolves around the champion Quetzalcoatl. Seeing his greatness, she came to him in a form of stunning beauty, offering her love and her formidable aid in the conflicts to come. But the hero, proud and fiercely independent, spurned her without a second thought. In that moment of rejection, the Guardian's role shifted from ally to agent of a colder truth. The Morrigan did not cause his death out of petty spite. Instead, she transitioned into her ultimate function, as the mouthpiece of a fate that could no longer be avoided. She began to prophesy the specific, tragic details of his end, watching as the events she foresaw unfolded with grim precision. Her failure was not a lack of power, but a surrender to a higher authority, the immutable law of destiny itself. She guarded the pattern, not the person. This presents a chilling nuance in the idea of a protector. What good is a guardian who can only warn you of your doom, not stop it? The Morrigan story forces us to ask if some forces are so vast that even gods must bow to them, becoming witnesses to tragedy rather than its preventers. From a guardian bound by the threads of fate, we move to one whose power was so absolute it became its own undoing. The cosmos itself required a battle fought every single night. In the sunbark sailing through the 12 hours of darkness, the god Ra faced his eternal nemesis, the colossal serpent Apep. This was not a guardian of a city or a treasure, but of reality's most fundamental rhythm, the dawn. Ra, along with fierce protectors like the god Set, engaged in this nightly, ritualistic combat, repelling the serpent of chaos so that the sun could rise once more over Egypt. And every morning they succeeded. So where is the failure? Apep was never permanently destroyed. His existence was a constant, looming reminder that the forces of disorder are an integral, ineradicable part of the universe. The Guardians of the Sun did not fail in their daily duty, but in their ultimate objective, the complete eradication of chaos. Their victory was always temporary, their success measured in a cycle of endless repetition. The profound fear that one night the serpent might win, that the sun would be swallowed and the world plunged into eternal darkness, was a shadow over the entire Egyptian worldview. Apep's enduring presence teaches us that the most vital forms of protection are not about achieving a final, perfect peace, but about mustering the strength to win the same essential battle, day after day after day. This acceptance of an endless struggle stands in stark contrast to the next Guardian, whose legend is built on the idea that a single, overwhelming application of force should be enough to secure a permanent victory. Even the most specialized guardians can be undone by a single, well-prepared countermeasure. Before the Dragon of Colchis could be faced, Jason had to confront the field's first line of defense, the Colchian bulls. These were no ordinary beasts, their hooves forged of unbreakable bronze and their breath a torrent of living fire. They were living instruments of purification, tasked with scorching the sacred earth where the golden fleece was kept, a constant, fiery patrol that made the very ground they walked a no-man's land. Their purpose was absolute deterrence, to incinerate any would-be thief long before they ever laid eyes on the fleece itself, and against any ordinary army or hero, they would have been utterly successful. But their design contained a fatal assumption that their primary weapon, that all-consuming fire, would always work. Jason, however, did not come as an ordinary man. He arrived armed with a secret weapon given to him by the sorceress Medea, a magical ointment derived from the gods themselves. When he stepped onto the field and the bulls unleashed their fiery breath, the flames washed over him harmlessly. The one attack that defined their entire purpose was completely neutralized. In that moment of baffled confusion, Jason was able to grapple with the mighty creatures, yoke them, and force them to plow the field as the ritual demanded. Their failure was absolute, not because they were weak, but because their entire strategy was built around a single, predictable form of attack. They were the perfect solution to a problem that never arrived, the problem of a direct assault. Jason and Medea did not assault them, they bypassed their entire reason for being. This reveals a profound flaw in any protection scheme that relies on a singular, overwhelming strength. It creates a system with no flexibility, no capacity to adapt when an enemy arrives not with a bigger sword, but with the one specific tool that turns your greatest asset into a useless spectacle. The fall of the Colchian bulls teaches us that the most formidable guard is not the one with the most fearsome weapon, but the one who understands that their own power might one day become their greatest liability. This idea of a fundamental strategic flaw leads us to a guardian whose failure was not in its power, but in a profound and tragic misunderstanding of the very thing it was sworn to protect. The Golem of Prague stood as a silent, earthen sentinel, a protector born not from myth but from desperation. In the dark alleys of the 16th century Jewish ghetto, the revered Rabbi Judah Loew performed a sacred act of creation. Using clay from the riverbank and esoteric knowledge, he shaped a colossal figure and breathed life into it by inscribing the Hebrew word for truth, emet, upon its forehead. This being, the golem, was a perfect servant of raw, physical power. It had no will of its own, only the singular command to patrol the streets and defend the community from the violent mobs that threatened its existence. For a time, it was a resounding success. Its sheer presence was a deterrent, and its strength, when needed, was absolute. It followed its programming without question, without fear, and without mercy. And that was the seed of its ultimate failure. The golem possessed immense power but held no capacity for moral judgment. It could not distinguish between a genuine threat and a simple quarrel. It could not understand nuance or mercy or the complex shades of human conflict. In some versions of the tale, this lack of a soul or conscience led it to become violently unstable, lashing out at the very citizens it was built to protect. In others, the rabbi was forced to deactivate his own creation, to erase the first letter of the word on its forehead, changing emet, truth, to met, death. The powerful guardian was returned to inert clay, not by an enemy but by its own creator's hand. The golem's failure is a timeless warning about the peril of creating a force you cannot fully control. It represents the catastrophic breakdown that occurs when pure, mindless power is unleashed without the guiding hand of wisdom, ethics, or compassion. A guardian that cannot think for itself will eventually become a threat as great as any it was built to oppose. This profound lesson in the limits of artificial protection finds a strange and chilling parallel in our next guardian, a figure whose failure was not one of violence or power, but of cosmic indifference. Even the light of a distant star can hold a dual and dangerous nature. High above the ancient world, the Chinese saw the brightest star in the night sky not as a simple point of light, but as a powerful, animate being, the Celestial Dog Tian Gou. This stellar guardian was believed to have the power to ward off evil spirits, its brilliant presence a kind of cosmic watchman against the encroaching dark. Yet this same celestial entity possessed a terrifying and contradictory hunger. In its mythology, the celestial dog would sometimes turn its jaws toward the very sources of light it was meant to accompany, attempting to devour the sun or the moon and plunging the world into the sudden, eerie darkness of an eclipse. When the sky began to dim, the people on the ground would erupt into a cacophony of noise, banging drums and pots, shouting and screaming to frighten the beast away from its celestial meal. And it would work. The sun or moon would slowly reappear, saved from the guardian's appetite. But here lies the profound failure. A protector that must itself be constantly driven off from attacking the things it is supposed to safeguard has utterly compromised its purpose. The celestial dog became the very source of the chaos it was meant to prevent, a guardian whose own unpredictable nature made it a permanent internal threat to cosmic order. Its story captures a chilling truth about power without consistent allegiance, reminding us that a force that can defend you can, in the very next moment, turn and become the disaster from which you need defending. This descent from the unpredictable heavens brings us to a guardian deeply rooted in the earth, a figure from Native American traditions whose failure sprang from a broken promise to the natural world. The Thunderbird's wings beat with the fury of the storm, a divine force meant to hold back the chaos of the deep. Across many Native American traditions, this colossal spirit was the ultimate guardian, a celestial warrior whose flashing eyes were lightning and whose mighty wings clapped with thunder. It stood as humanity's champion against monstrous water serpents and the untamed forces of the underworld, a being of immense power dedicated to maintaining a fragile balance. Yet there exist stories of a great flood, a deluge so vast and primordial that even the Thunderbird was rendered helpless. In these narratives, its failure is one of scale, not of will or strength. The Guardian fought, but the rising waters were a force of nature on a cosmic level, an event so immense that no single entity, no matter how powerful, could stand as a dam against it. This is not a tale of a guardian's weakness, but a profound lesson in humility. It speaks to the existence of cycles and events so vast that they operate beyond the reach of any protector, reminding us that some forces of creation and destruction are simply meant to be endured, not defeated. The Thunderbird's legacy is one of courage in the face of the inevitable, an acknowledgement that true strength sometimes lies in accepting the limits of one's power. This sober recognition of nature's ultimate authority finds a darker, more personal echo in the dense forests of Slavic folklore. Its own desires became a cage it could not escape. In the shadowed forests and misty mountains of Slavic folklore, the Zime were not mere monsters. They were powerful, dragon-like entities, often bound by ancient pacts to serve as protectors of sacred places or royal bloodlines. A Zime's strength was immense, its presence a bulwark against invaders and dark spirits alike. It was a force of order, its will bent to the service of a higher duty. Yet within this formidable shell beat a heart susceptible to the most dangerous of all forces, raw, unchecked desire. The Zime's downfall was not typically a physical defeat, but a moral one. In countless tales, a Zime assigned to guard a princess or a kingdom would find its gaze lingering too long, its protective instinct curdling into a possessive obsession. The guardian would then commit the ultimate betrayal, not by abandoning its post, but by seizing the very person it was sworn to protect. it would snatch the princess from her tower, spiriting her away to its remote mountain lair. In that single, selfish act, the Zime transformed from a shield into the primary threat. It became the kidnapper, the source of the kingdom's terror and grief. This failure was born from a profound internal compromise. The Zime did not forget its duty, it actively chose to violate it, placing its own longing above the sacred trust it had been given. Its strength, once a source of security, was now the instrument of the kingdom's despair. The only resolution was for a hero to arrive and slay the corrupted guardian, not to defeat an external monster, but to put down a warden who had turned tyrant. The Zime's story is a stark lesson in how a guardian's greatest enemy can often be the reflection in the water. The flaws within their own nature that, left unchecked, can corrupt their entire purpose. This pattern of a noble protector sliding into the role of antagonist through a fatal character flaw finds a haunting parallel in the shining, yet ultimately tragic, halls of Camelot. The greatest fortress can be shattered by a crack from within its own walls. In the shining realm of loggers, the Knights of the Round Table were not just warriors, they were a living, breathing ideal. Their oath to chivalry was the very magic that held the kingdom together, a collective vow to be guardians of the weak and enforcers of a justice higher than any king's command. For a time it worked. Camelot was a beacon, and the Round Table, with no head to signify equality, was its brilliant center. But this system of protection had a fatal, hidden vulnerability. It was built entirely on the flawless character of the individuals who sat at that table. The first fracture appeared not on a battlefield but in the king's own heart. The love affair between Queen Guinevere and Sir Lancelot, the kingdom's greatest champion, was more than a personal betrayal. It was a direct violation of the sacred oaths of loyalty and fealty that bound the entire fellowship together. This single, secret sin introduced a poison of hypocrisy into the foundation of their guardianship. How could they defend a code of honor they themselves were secretly breaking? The quest for the Holy Grail, an endeavor meant to be their ultimate spiritual triumph, instead acted as a centrifugal force, scattering the knights across the land on solitary, ego-driven journeys. In their absence, the unity of the Round Table frayed. The final, fatal blow came from Mordred, a betrayal born from within the royal family itself. When he exposed the affair and seized the throne in Arthur's absence, he forced the knights to choose sides in a war that pitted brother against brother. The Battle of Camlan was not the fall of a kingdom to an external enemy. It was a civil war, a suicide pact where the guardians destroyed each other. Arthur and Mordred fell by each other's hands, and the Round Table was shattered forever. Their failure is perhaps the most human of all, a lesson that the most noble systems are terrifyingly fragile. They are only as strong as the personal integrity of the people who uphold them, vulnerable to the very envy, lust, and ambition they were created to defeat. This devastating collapse from internal imperfection finds its ultimate expression in a final guardian, whose story is not one of moral failure, but of a duty so perfect it could only end in a single, tragic, and inevitable way. Baldur was the one thing Asgard could not afford to lose. His radiance was not just a pleasant quality, it was a fundamental anchor for the gods' own sanity and hope in a cosmos already shadowed by prophecies of their doom. His mother, Frigg, understood this. She did not build a wall or post a sentry. She engineered the most comprehensive security system imaginable, traveling through all the realms to extract a sacred, binding oath from every single entity in existence. Fire and iron, stone and sickness, every animal and every plant, every conceivable substance swore a vow never to harm her son. The result was a living shield of absolute perfection. Baldur became a walking embodiment of invulnerability, and the gods turned his safety into a sport, gleefully hurling weapons at him just to watch them harmlessly bounce away. This was the pinnacle of protective magic, a system with no apparent flaw, and that very sense of total security was the poison that seeped into the whole. Complacency set in. The game itself revealed the system's single, catastrophic blind spot. In her exhaustive campaign, Frigg had encountered the mistletoe. She saw its young, slender form, a plant so seemingly tender and insignificant, and she made a conscious, deliberate choice. She deemed it too harmless, too young and small to bother with. It was not an accidental omission, it was a calculated dismissal. This one tiny exception became the thread that, when pulled, unraveled the entire tapestry. The trickster Loki, the embodiment of chaos that thrives on rigid order, needed only to find this single crack in the perfect facade. He crafted a dart from the overlooked mistletoe and guided the hand of the blind god Hodder. The one substance that had never sworn an oath found its mark, and the beloved god fell. Frigg's oaths did not break. They were perfectly, tragically fulfilled. Every other thing in creation kept its vow. The failure was not in the power of the oaths, but in the arrogance of the architect who believed she could identify and exclude a threat based on its appearance. The death of Balder was the point of no return for the Norse gods. It was the event that locked in the grim certainty of Ragnarok, proving that a guardian's most dangerous mistake is not underestimating a known enemy, but overlooking the one element they consider too trivial to matter. From the frozen halls of the north, where a single sprig of green brought down a pantheon, we journey to the ancient islands of Japan, where another guardian's downfall would be written not in oversight, but in a moment of profound and very human distraction. Even stone guardians can watch only in silent witness, standing sentinel at the entrance to every Shinto shrine. The Kame-nyu, the lion-dog statues, present a face of eternal vigilance. One with an open mouth to utter the first syllable of the Sanskrit alphabet, the other with a closed mouth to speak the last. They symbolically contain all of creation between them, a powerful ward against malevolent spirits. For centuries, they have been the first and last sight for millions of pilgrims, their stoic presence a constant reassurance of a sacred boundary. Yet their power exists entirely in the realm of the symbolic. They are a prayer carved in stone, an ideal of protection made manifest, but they possess no will, no strength, and no capacity for direct action. They cannot raise a paw to stop a swinging sword, they cannot shout a warning as a tsunami approaches the coast, and they cannot mend the cracks of neglect that appear in a shrine when a community's faith begins to fade. Their failure is inherent in their very nature. They represent the hope for safety, but they are utterly separate from the messy, physical realities that threaten it. Throughout Japan's long history, the shrines these statues guarded have burned in the fires of war, have been swept away by floods and earthquakes, and have slowly crumbled into ruins as traditions were forgotten. The Kame-nyu stood through it all, watching the destruction they were built to prevent. Their silent roars a testament to the profound limitation of symbolic power alone. They teach us that while a symbol can focus hope and define a sacred space, it cannot by itself be a shield against the relentless forces of the physical world. This final, quiet failure brings our journey to a close, having explored 20 mythic protectors who could not stop the fall. From the 100 eyes of Argus to the silent stone dogs of Japan, a common, haunting thread connects their stories. These recurring patterns across the globe speak to a shared, ancient understanding of protection's paradox. It was never a simple matter of a stronger enemy arriving at the gate. The most common undoing was a kind of strategic bypass, where an opponent used wit and magic to sidestep a guardian's entire reason for being. Argus saw everything, but he could not defend against a lullaby. The Colchian dragon never slept, yet it had no defense for an enchanted sleep. Their greatest strengths became irrelevant the moment the confrontation shifted from a test of power to a test of ingenuity. This reveals a profound truth that a system designed only to counter the last threat will always be vulnerable to the next one. A second, deeply human pattern emerges from the internal world of the Guardians themselves. So many fell not to a sword but to a flaw in their own character. Indra's kingdom crumbled because of his arrogance. The Zime abandoned its duty for possessive desire. The Knights of the Round Table shattered because of hidden betrayals and fractured loyalty. In these stories, the fortress walls were perfectly strong, but the foundations were built on the unstable ground of mortal failings. This suggests that the most critical component of any defense is not the power it wields, but the integrity of the one who wields it. Then there is the pattern of inevitability, where even the most potent guardians are shown to have limits against forces far greater than themselves. Heimdallr could sound the alarm for Ragnarok, but he could not stop the destiny the gods themselves had set in motion. The Thunderbird might battle serpents, but it could not hold back a primordial flood. These myths acknowledge a humbling reality that some cycles of creation and destruction operate on a scale that simply dwarfs any single protector. They teach a lesson in acceptance that part of strength is knowing when you are facing a tide that cannot be turned. And perhaps the most chilling pattern is the Guardian's transformation into the very monster it was meant to guard against. The Nemean Lion began as a master of its domain, but ended as the primary terror of its people. The Golem, created as a defender, became a mindless hazard to its own community. This is the ultimate corruption of purpose, a warning that power without wisdom, or a mandate without moral compass, will inevitably curdle. It forces us to ask who guards the Guardians from themselves. So what do these ancient, echoing failures mean for us today? We may not have a three-headed hound guarding our underworld or a dragon protecting our treasure, but we have built our own modern pantheon of protectors. We have complex financial systems guarded by algorithms, digital fortresses protected by firewalls, and global security reliant on intricate alliances. And these systems are just as vulnerable to the same age-old patterns. A cunning hacker can bypass the most sophisticated digital wall, just as Hermes bypassed Argus. An institution can rot from the inside out from corruption and pride, just as Indra's court did. Our own creations, from artificial intelligences to powerful organizations, can transform into threats we can no longer control, echoing the fate of the Golem. And we too must sometimes face overwhelming forces, whether they are natural disasters or the unstoppable tide of societal change, that remind us of our own limits, just as the Thunderbird was reminded. These 20 myths are not just forgotten tales, they are a mirror. They show us that the fundamental vulnerabilities of any protective system are not technological, but human and philosophical. The real lesson is that eternal vigilance requires more than just watching the horizon. It requires introspection, humility, and the wisdom to know that the greatest danger often lies not in the monster outside the gates, but in the flaw in the design, the crack in the oath, or the overlooked sprig of mistletoe we never thought to ask about. Each story of a fallen guardian is a testament to the fragile architecture of power. We have journeyed from the 100 eyes of Argus to the silent stone dogs of Japan, witnessing how divine might, eternal vigilance, and brute strength are not foolproof guarantees against collapse. The true lesson is not that these protectors were weak, but that their strength was incomplete. Guardianship demands more than raw power. It requires a deep and abiding wisdom, the humility to acknowledge one's own blind spots, and a profound understanding of inherent limitations. These myths challenge our deepest yearning for a single, unbreachable shield, reminding us that reliance on any solitary entity or rigid system for absolute safety is a precarious hope. They urge us instead to build resilient societies woven from many threads, so that when one pillar falters, the entire structure does not crumble into dust. As the philosopher George Santayana wisely observed, Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Let these 20 echoes from a forgotten age serve as a lasting reminder to champion integrity over arrogance, to prize foresight over complacency, and to embrace collective responsibility in all that we seek to protect. Thank you for joining this exploration of the guardians that failed. If these tales of mythic vulnerabilities resonated with you, we would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. For more journeys into the heart of historical mysteries and mythology, please subscribe.